Anybody remember what the title of this series is? Effective Christianity. Thank you. Absolutely. Effective Christianity. This series is based on how to be an effective Christian. What does that word effective mean to you? What do we mean when we say an effective Christian? Oh yeah, accomplish your goals. That's it. We've got goals that we're trying to achieve, and to be effective is to accomplish those goals. What are some of those goals, speaking of? Well, we need to know that, right? We need to be working to achieve them. What are they? Okay, saving the lost, saving souls. Absolutely, a primary goal of ours. What's another one? I'm sorry? Yeah, influence, right? Being a good example. Would you say, Miss Julie? Our salvation, absolutely. Making sure we go to heaven, bringing others to heaven, being good influences. Anything else? Yeah, spreading the gospel, absolutely. Teaching others about Jesus the Christ. We've got goals and we've got to be effective. We've got to accomplish those goals. And so this class is designed to focus and talk about how to do that. What were some of the things, and I'm not going to re-preach the lesson, but I know not everyone was here, and it's good to be reminded of some of these things. What were a few of the points that we made, things that might hinder us from being an effective Christian that we talked about last week? What might hinder us from being effective? Being selfish. Such a huge point. Being selfish instead of selfless. If I care only about me and my own concerns and my own desires, I am not going to be an effective Christian. What else? What was another one? That's right. Unity versus discord versus disunity, right? Being focused. If we're not on the same team, if we're cliquish, as we sometimes say, if we're splitting up, if we're divided, if we're not getting along, we're not working things out and growing together and working together and being unified, we're not going to be effective as individuals or especially as the body of Christ, the local church here at OceanSide. Maybe one more. Apathy, absolutely. Apathy, boredom, a lack of care, a lack of concern, right? Just making this just another thing, another daily activity. It's just a common thing, right? It doesn't mean anything to us, and it's not exciting, right? All of those things that we could talk about. Being apathetic towards the church is going to hinder our effectiveness as Christians. And so tonight, we talk about effective Christianity. The first lesson, the first thing I want to devote our time to, and how to be an effective Christian, number one, is to be an effective leadership. That's our focus tonight. Right? Now, what do you think of, thinking of the church right now, what do you think of when you think of being a biblical leader? What pops into your mind right off the bat? Who do you think of when you think of leaders? Okay, well, yes. I'm about to ask that question next. Before you think of individual people, let me ask it this way. As far as the church itself here at OceanSide is concerned, who do you think of when somebody talks about OceanSide's leaders? Elders. That's what I was getting at. Normally when we think of leaders, we think of elders, and that's important. Right? 1 Timothy 3, we talk about the qualifications of an elder and their responsibility. They are a special kind of leader, no doubt about that. But I'm not talking about elders tonight. Right? I'm talking about, if I was to say more loosely, the leaders at OceanSide, who might that entail? How many of us are leaders here at OceanSide in a spiritual sense of being a leader? Hopefully all of us, right? Absolutely. Hopefully all of us. You know, we might think of husbands in the male leadership. Spiritually, the wife is to be submissive to the husband, who is to love her, make that easy for her to do because of the way he loves her, like Christ loves her. And right, we could talk about that too in Ephesians 5. But what we're focusing on is every one of us as individuals. I need to be an effective leader as a Christian if I want to be an effective Christian, by, of course, extension. Now, who do you think of, let me ask it this way now, who do you think of when you think of good leaders? Or I might just say even powerful leaders. Doesn't have to be a good leader, but a very effective leader. Who comes to mind? Could be biblical, could be worldly, either one. Moses, absolutely. Moses. Now, what made Moses an effective leader? What are qualities about Moses? Why was he such a good leader? Okay, he obeyed God, which is a very interesting point. A leader, Moses was a leader because he was good at what? Obeying, right? Kind of an interesting thought. We're going to talk more about that a little later. What else? Any other qualities that made Moses such a one? I mean, he was called one of the greatest prophets Israel ever had, right? His example. Absolutely. That's another one. His example. Yes, ma'am. Both of you had your hand up. Absolutely. That's a very good point. At first, Moses was kind of skeptical, wasn't he? He resisted it. Not me. Choose somebody else, God. But when he came through, he really came through, didn't he? What a wonderful leader. Yes, sir.
But he used another name for the obeying God, but it's the fellowship. And you just follow before you.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Again, we're going to talk a little more about that as well. I love that point. Now, yes, ma'am. He did. Very good point. Moses delegated. That's so important, isn't it? It wasn't that Moses wasn't working. He was doing too much. And so he finally delegated. Jethro, remember, came to him and said, Moses, you're gonna kill yourself, in essence. You've got to get some help to delegate some of this work out, or you're going to lose your mind. You can't be an effective leader if you're overdoing it. Jim?
God was so repentant of having the children of Israel out there, he stood up for them.
He did. Absolutely. He absolutely stood up for him. Did you have another thought? Yes, sir. Or your first thought? That's right. The meekest man of all. What is meekness? Certainly a quality of a good leader. Power under control. That's right. Power under control. All right, let's flip the coin. Who do you think of when you think of a very powerful and effective leader that was not a godly man? Who comes to mind? Adolf Hitler, of course. Somebody's got to mention that. Adolf Hitler, true or false, he was an effective leader. He absolutely was. But he was not a godly leader, was he? Right? What are some qualities about Adolf Hitler? Why was he such an effective leader? What kind of tactics did he use? Fear. That's right. Yes, sir. A wonderful liar. Deception. Manipulation, right? Fear. Now, here's the main question that I want to get out of this. What is the difference between Moses and Hitler? What is the main difference between those two men? What's the difference in a leader that's obviously a positive, effective leader versus one that's negative?
One has God.
Yeah, it's that simple, isn't it? One has God and the other one doesn't. It's about that standard of morality, right? It's about what our goals are, what we're focused upon. And so you can be a leader in a lot of ways, and you're going to lead people one way or another. The question is, how are you going to lead them, and how effective are you going to be in that leadership? All right, let's look at some Bible leaders, and from these guys that we're going to talk about, make some observations, some applications. First of all, Noah. Genesis 6 and verse 8. Found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah is unique to me, stands out to me, because he was a leader even when everyone else around him was not. He stood up for what he believed in. He stayed faithful to God even when nobody else did. Right? There were, some say thousands, some even say over 1 million people alive in his time. And how many souls were saved? 8 total, right? Outside of Noah, 7. Counting Noah, you had 8 souls that were saved. That's incredible to me, right? A good leader is faithful even when the majority is not. I want you to think about, it's one thing to be faithful, to stick with God in the big things, right? We might be faithful to our spouse. That's faithfulness. That's good. An effective leader needs to be faithful to a spouse, of course. We might be faithful in our attendance to the church. That's great. But what about being faithful in the little things? I was thinking about this, and I read an illustration that stuck with me. And let's say you go to, we've all been here. Let's say you go to the store. You're at the grocery store, and you're buying several things, and you've got a jar of peanut butter in your buggy. And by accident, you don't get that, you're putting them in, and as they scan it, you're putting them back in, and you just accidentally don't get that peanut butter up there. It doesn't get scanned. You don't pay for it. And you go out to the car, and you're headed home, and you realize, or maybe your spouse is in the seat beside you, she's checking out the receipt, and you realize that you didn't pay for the peanut butter. You've got 2 options. Option number 1 is you can just say, you know what, it's just peanut butter. Walmart makes a killing anyways, or wherever, Target, wherever you're at, right? It's what, $4, however much peanut butter, it's not even a big deal, you can just go on home. Or you can turn around with the screaming kids in the back and go back to Walmart and get them out of the car again and go in, and the embarrassment of walking up and saying I didn't, and then you can pay for that peanut butter. What's the best option? Go back and pay for it. Why? That's right. That's the right thing to do. You've got to pay for it, right? You've got to. It's being faithful in the little things, I really believe, that separate an effective Christian, an effective leader, from one who isn't. It's one thing to be faithful over the big things, if you will, and that's important. But being faithful over the little things is what separates the men from the boys, as we sometimes say. Look at Luke 16. Let's look at a Bible verse or two together. Luke chapter 16. Somebody read for us verse 10, if you're willing.
He who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much. And he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much.
What a passage, right? He that is faithful in the least of things is faithful in what? In much. But he that's unjust or unfaithful in the smallest things is also unfaithful in what? That's quite a statement, isn't it, to think about. What are some things, I want to make application of this now. What are some ways that a Christian, outside of peanut butter, what are some things that might come up that we might be tempted to just call it a little thing and just do it anyways knowing we shouldn't, or not do something that we know that we should? What are some things that might arise, Gil? Yeah, that's a great one. Speaking negatively to somebody, speaking ill of somebody. Could be gossip, could be speaking to someone in a way that you shouldn't, and simply something like, I'm sorry. That can be such it may seem like a little thing, but it's important. To tell somebody that you're sorry, to admit your faults. That's a great example. I saw a couple, or I heard somebody over here. Yes, sir. Income tax. Boy, isn't that one. That we can just say that's a little thing, plus, you know, where that money's going to go, how it's going to be spent. I don't want to give those taxes. I can cut back and save a little extra and lie just a little bit, deceive a little bit on my taxes. That's a great example. Yes, sir, Mr. David. I'm sorry? Breaking the speed limit. What a good example. What a good example. Why is breaking the speed limit important? Why would David mention that? Why do we need to be concerned as Christians about the speed limit? Obey the laws of the land, Romans 13. Right? Now, I know you can't literally always be right on 45 miles an hour, but you and I both know the difference between speeding and not. Well, I think we understand the difference. Right? Sometimes we want to get somewhere quick, and again, it's those little things that can be very important. Right? Sometimes that's why we have spouses. They help us out with that, don't they? That passenger driver. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, we need to be careful about that. It may seem like a petty thing. That's just the speed limit, right? That's not a big deal. But that's something that, if I'm breaking it, it's sin against God. It's serious. A California stop. What does that mean? Oh, is that what they call that? I did not know. I learned something new. Yeah, don't make those California stops, right? You're supposed to wait till the car does what? We could get real technical, I guess, but we need to obey the laws of the land, don't we? Yes, sir. Drive by grace. Drive by grace. That's right. That's so true. Jim? Very good. Man, so true, isn't it? It can. It sure does. Right? We have those deadlines. Right? You think that's important for Christians to try to stick to that, to keep up with those kinds of things, and to be on time? Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Well, yes. Paying somebody back, our fellow brethren especially. Absolutely. Very good. Yes, ma'am.
You borrow something. Someone, not talking about money, but if someone loans you something.
Yes.
Not getting it back, in a timely manner. We sort of have a little divide. My dad could not stand it if he didn't get that back just as soon as he could.
Yes.
And other people tend to think, I'll get it back one of these days. No, I'll get it back one of these days.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly.
Exactly. And I think that's just as bad as loaning money.
Yeah, it's the same concept, isn't it? Same principle. She was talking about somebody letting you borrow something and getting that back to them in a timely manner. What would it be called if you decided not to give that back? That's called stealing, right? There's Bible for that, isn't there? These things that may seem little to us that matter. And a good leader, someone who is effective as a Christian, who is faithful in all things, will think about even the small thing. In fact, there's a good tract back there, if you haven't read it already, called I believe it's called Sweat the Small Stuff. Sweat the Small Stuff. And that's some more information if you want to read more about that. But good thoughts. One more thought and we'll keep going. Yes, sir. That's what it's about. Yep, absolutely. Little things mean a lot. Yeah, oh yeah, they always are, aren't they? But there's a lot of truth to that, isn't there, for a Christian? Little things means, and again, in the majority of the world, are those things a big deal to people? The speed limit and, things like that. Do people in the world care about that kind of stuff, really? Taxes and all? Not really. Not as they should. But that's the difference between a true, faithful, and effective Christian leader and one who is not. All right, let's keep going. Good thoughts. I really appreciate that. Oh, yes, sir.
Concerned about the speeding and the stop sign is slowing down.
Yes.
I heard a long time ago, the guy was going and slowed down to the stop sign. Police pulled him over. He said, well, I slowed down. He said, well, look at it this way. Suppose I started beating you upside your head with my baton. You want me to slow down or stop?
That's one way to look at it. If you didn't hear that, talking about a gentleman telling a police officer he slowed down, he just didn't stop, and that police officer said, what if I started beating you over the head with my baton? Would you want me to slow down or stop? So for the audio, I wanted to repeat that. That's right. That's spot on. All right, let's talk about Abraham for a moment. Abraham, Genesis 12 and verse 1 and following. God told him and his family to get out of where? To do what? Yeah, get out of the land of your kindred. Get out of there and go to, and where did he tell him he was going to go? Did he name the city for him? Did he name the land for him? No. To the place that I'm going to tell you. I guess we put it this way. He embraced the unknown. There was no fear. A good leader is willing to embrace the unknown. He's not going to be afraid to sacrifice, to get out of his comfort zone or her comfort zone, to do what is necessary, to do what is right. Matthew 10 and verse 28, you know this passage. Jesus talking about the fact that we don't need to fear those that can kill the body, those that can break in and steal, all of these kinds of things. What we need to be worried about is he who can do what? Kill the soul. Kill the soul. When you think of a good leader, whether you think of a man or a woman, doesn't matter, but you think of someone that's strong, someone that's brave, that's courageous. And there's a lot of truth to that, spiritually speaking, for a Christian. We need to be courageous. Now let me ask you this. In what ways or in what situations might the Christian be tested when it comes to fear? We're not asked by God to get out of our country, as it were. Maybe it turns out we move somewhere for a mission field or something like that. But how does God ask us as individuals to get out of our comfort zones? What might God ask us to do that we might be afraid to do, that might be difficult for us? What's that? Door knocking. Door knocking, absolutely. Right? That could be a bit scary. Door knocking, and especially today, right? You hear stories about, the way people run off. Even one gentleman that was a college minister of mine back in the day that had a gun pointed at him. I mean, that's scary. That can be a pretty scary thing. We're told to evangelize, and we're not commanded to door knock necessarily, but we're commanded to evangelize, and that can be an effective way to do that. And we might be scared, though. We might be afraid. If you're not going to go door knocking because you're afraid of what might happen, that's different. That's not an excuse that we ought to be proud of. Yes, ma'am, Miss Jeannie. Good to have you back, by the way.
Obeying God above the law of the land.
Yes. I was hoping someone would mention that. Especially in today's society, right? We got to think about that. Obeying God over the laws of man, over what's going on. How's that going to affect us potentially in the future? What things are we looking at that we need to be ready to stand up against? Okay, going to war. Yeah, going to war. Susan? Absolutely. When our employer asks us to work on Sunday, that's something that a lot of folks have to deal with, right? Asking us to miss services. I don't have to deal with that, thankfully. I'm the opposite, right? I'd be in trouble, but there's a lot of that in the secular world. Yes, sir. That's it. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're seeing it more and more in the news that, this is coming and that's coming, and who knows what's going to happen. But we cannot be afraid to teach the truth. Are we going to just decide that we're going to accept things that God doesn't because we're afraid of the consequences? Right? That's certainly getting out of our comfort zone, standing up for the truth. Did you have your hand up again, Jeannie? Oh, okay. Yes, ma'am.
I was reading something in one of those pickup magazines that you get, polio or something. A Baptist church somewhere has been carrying on a campaign about putting their, about homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, just telling it like it is, homosexuality. Well, people have been going there and switching the letters around to read a positive message.
Oh, wow.
Homosexuality is a positive message. And so the JSO was trying to track down the people who were doing this. Now, the preacher responded, I have a gun, and I'm willing to shoot somebody if I see them messing with our sign. I'm willing to shoot somebody.
Wow.
So, pretty strong.
That is a pretty strong stance. Well,
And so the person responded, wow, that's a good answer. I guess he's read the book.
wow. There's all kinds of stuff going on out there.
Taking it to the
Yeah, that is. There's a lot. And by the way, on a side note, Lord willing, this Sunday we're going to talk about Christianity and self-defense, about things like that. We're going to talk about that some this Sunday. I hope you're planning on being here for that. But that aside, any other thoughts about fear, about how that can hinder us from being an effective Christian? If I'm afraid, then I can't be effective. I can't stand up for the truth if I'm worried about what those consequences might be. Ashley? Yes.
Sexuality, standing up on social media is very important as well, because so many, like I have a personal Christian that's in the church, but she supports the homosexual community, and I'm like, well, like I know that it's wrong.
Yes.
And I just think it's just so she doesn't see any ridicule.
Yes.
It seems like anytime anyone says other than what's going on, they're all over you. Like,
Absolutely.
it's crazy. So I think having that fear, sometimes people come to that fear to being outed out on social media, and it can go too far.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And we need to be aware of that social media and, what we're saying, what others are saying, and we could do a whole lesson just on that. What we're liking on there, what we're supporting, what we're encouraging. That's a great point. In Revelation 21:8, growing up, I don't know if this was, I don't know how long ago this was. Maybe y'all know this thing as well. But there used to be a song that was about liars, and it was to a tune that's very common. But basically, it referenced Revelation 21:8. Liars are going to go to hell, and that was the passage that said that. But it's interesting because there's several things Jesus lists that will keep us from heaven, that will put us in the lake of fire. And the first one in his list in Revelation 21:8 is what? The fearful. The fearful. And in that context, speaking of, what kind of fearfulness is he talking about? In what way were these first century Christians being fearful? What were they fearful of? Death. They were fearful. That's what we're talking about. They were fearful of what the Roman Empire was going to do to them, what was going to happen as a result of them standing up for what they believed in. A good, effective leader is not going to waver. He's going to stand up for what he believes in, even no matter what the consequences are. Well, I'll throw a hand over here, I believe. Jim, or two of them. I'm sorry? Fearful to do the Lord's work. Absolutely. That is absolutely going to hinder us. It really will. Yes, sir. Gil?
I think the most common, I believe, fearful thing is just to confess Jesus Christ. In other words, to bring up Jesus Christ
Yep.
in a conversation, a normal conversation.
Absolutely.
to bring up just because they think that you really are.
Right, exactly. We could be fearful just to mention Him because we're afraid of how the people are going to react. We could be afraid to bow our heads in a restaurant and pray because we're afraid of what people around us might think or how they might look at us. And that fear doesn't have to just be about our lives, does it? It can be simply worried about what people think instead of worrying about what God thinks. It's sad, but sometimes we do that. Jim?
You know, we as Christians rarely ever mention God. If you listen to the Muslims, just about every other sentence they say is God's will.
Yep.
Or Allah will, whatever, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So my point is, if you're in a restaurant or whatever, other than bringing before you meal, people have no idea, you know, that you're a Christian. You never mention God. You never say, you know, well, this is God's will. Or anything like that.
Absolutely. It's a great point. How often are we even mentioning God? How can we expect people around us to know that we're different, to know that we're a Christian, to know that we believe in God if we don't ever even talk about Him? We talk about that which is on our mind, that which is important to us. David? And out of season. That's right. That sounds like a Bible verse, doesn't it? Absolutely. We need to be instant, in season, out of season. Absolutely. I believe that's 1 Timothy 2:2. Absolutely true. Good point. Did I see another hand? Okay, I'm seeing things. All right, let's keep going. We don't need to fear a good leader. I'm going to skip this one, not because Daniel's not important, but because I want to make sure to get to another point or two that I feel is more important tonight. Joshua. Let's talk about Joshua for a minute. Joshua chapter 24 and verse 15. Some of you have it posted on your wall at home. You know what it says. The end of that passage, right? He tells them, you choose who you're going to serve. But as for me and my house, we're going to what? We will serve the Lord. A good leader leads by example and not just by command. Right? Anybody can tell everybody else what to do. Anybody can say, do this, or I want you to take care of this. I want you to get after this, or don't do this. Or it's easy to spout that stuff out. But a good, effective leader is going to do it himself. He's going to show by his example. He's going to take care of whatever it is himself. As Larry's mentioned before, you don't ever ask somebody to do something that you yourself are not willing to do. I want to bring this out. I just think this is really interesting. In Joshua 8, let's go there for a moment here. Joshua 8, and then we'll make application here, and we'll probably have to conclude, unfortunately, after this point. But I don't want to miss it. Joshua chapter 8. Somebody earlier mentioned example, and I think it's an important point. In Joshua 8, we have the people of Israel. They've conquered Jericho. Now they are conquering city number 2, and that is Ai, literally spelled A-I. You might pronounce it I. And so they are going to attack. And this is a very interesting reading. If you haven't read this recently or studied it, you do so, because God has this plan, and He's gonna get Israel to act like they're losing the battle, to get the people of Ai to run after them, to chase them, and to leave the city. And He's got flanks prepared. He's got troops, thousands of men ready to flank and to defeat them in battle. And it's interesting because in verse 18, Joshua, of course, is now the leader. And in verse 18, the Lord says to Joshua, stretch out the spear that is in thine hand toward Ai, for I will give it unto thine hand. And Joshua stretched out the spear that he had in his hand toward the city. You can picture that. At this point, he's up high above them, and he holds his spear out the entire battle, and they have the victory. What does that remind you of? Does that sound familiar to you at all? Moses. Do you remember Moses back in Exodus 17 verses 9 and following? Moses is holding up the staff. You remember he had help on both sides. But here's the important part. Who is it that is leading those troops to battle when Moses is holding that staff up? Well, ultimately God is, of course. But who is selected by Moses as a man to lead them into that battle? Joshua. You see Joshua leading troops into battle, gaining the victory at the front line in Exodus 17. And now guess what Joshua is? He's an effective leader. And he's holding out that spear just like Moses did. And he's telling them to go and to fight. And he's going to be there and he's going to lead them in the way that Moses did. Joshua is not telling them to do something that he himself had not already what? Done. He absolutely did. And I think that's so critical. A good leader is going to show how to lead. He's going to show how to be a good example through his actions. One of the most familiar verses in the Bible, Matthew 5:16. Somebody quote it for us. Or multiple people quote it for us. Let your light so shine before men that they may what? Yeah, see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Seeing that example. Let's turn to 1 Thessalonians chapter 1. And then we'll open it up for another thought or two before we dismiss. 1 Thessalonians chapter 1. Somebody read verses 6 and 7, please.
You became followers of and of the Lord, having received the word in much affection and joy of the Holy Ghost, so that you were examples to all that believed in Macedonia and Achaia.
Excellent, excellent. So you see these brethren, and Paul tells them here in verse 6, these Thessalonians, in the first part of verse 6, that they became what of him? Followers. And this is kind of what we were talking about earlier. They became followers of him, and ultimately, based upon verse 7, they became what? Examples. Somebody mentioned earlier, I believe it was Brother Roper back there, he mentioned that we are to do what in order to be an effective leader? We've got to follow. Sometimes you've got to follow in order to lead. Now, as a good, effective Christian leader, who is it that we follow? There's more than one answer to this, but ultimately, of course, who do we follow? 1 Peter 2:21, we follow God, we follow Christ and His example. Who else would be legitimate, effective to follow in this world? Good, elders, right? Righteous men. It's good to follow them. Right? We're talking about Paul here. These people at Thessalonica, they followed after Paul. They were followers of him. In fact, he told those at Corinth, be ye followers of me as I follow who? Christ. Don't follow their mistakes. Elders, preacher, anybody. We all make mistakes. So don't follow those mistakes, but obviously follow that which is right. In order to be an effective leader, I've got to be an effective follower as well, a follower of what is right. Why is that so important? But why is it important to follow before you can lead? What do you get out of following is what I'm getting at. You learn. You've got to learn. We've got to learn. We've got to get experience. We've got to grow. And so a good, effective leader understands, does he have all the answers? No. Is he flawless? Is he never going to make mistakes? No, of course not. Of course that's... A good, effective leader is going to be, you could call this point in a way about humility, right? He's going to understand that he has to learn in order to lead. Any final thoughts on this particular point, or anything that's been said? Our time's almost up, so any other thoughts at all? I had to go through this point a little quicker than I'd like, but yes, sir, with two thoughts and then we'll conclude.
I was just going to say, you can have a position in leadership, but you're only an effective leader, even if you're leading him, how would you lead?
Exactly. That's such a good point. Right? You can stand in front of the mirror and pretend to be a leader all day, but nobody's being led, right? You've got to have people who believe in you as that leader, who are following you and who are acting as you do. And again, you're going to lead people one way or another. The question is, how are you going to lead and how effective will you be? Yes, ma'am.
Well, Jesus was a leader, and he showed the example of washing his disciples' feet. So you have to humble yourself. Sometimes leaders are very, put themselves very high, but you have to put yourself low.
Absolutely. You're exactly right. Great minds think alike, right? I say that humbly. Jesus, that was my next point. I don't have time to get to it, but she is exactly right. Jesus being a servant, the greatest example of all. I'm mad at myself. I didn't even get to talk to it, but I'm so glad you brought it up. You're exactly right. Mr. Gilbert, and then we'll conclude. That's what you were going to say. Look at there. All these great. Anybody else going to say that? Just take credit now. You can have it. All right. Very, very good. I appreciate you giving me your time and attention so very much. And we'll conclude. But let me just finally say again, we need to be effective Christians, and the first part to that is being an effective leader. Every one of us, not just elders, not just husbands, every one of us need to be effective leaders because we are affecting others around us one way or another, and it needs, of course, to be in a positive sense. Be faithful in the little things, not just the big things. Right? Be humble. And don't be afraid to stand up for what is right as Abraham did. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I'm actually going to quit before the bell. Can you believe it? We'll pause for a few moments and then we'll have an invitation song, and then we'll be dismissed in prayer. Thank you so much.